Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay. So next on the agenda, we're getting started a little earlier than we thought, but that's a good thing, I think. Everybody is here. So we're about to start a candidates debate or forum. This forum will consist of a number of questions in the beginning, which we'll be asking each candidate. All candidates will have a chance to answer the same question. We will have a timer on screen. It'll be 90 seconds for an answer. We want to have a visible timer so everybody knows that everybody's being treated equally. After that, we'll have a lightning round when we're going to have questions that are more answered yes or no. And we're trying to get through those as quickly as possible. Okay. Then we'll give a chance for each candidate to ask another candidate one question. And then at that point, we'll go to any comments or questions that come through the Facebook or YouTube feed. Everybody, please understand that they can ask questions on the feed. If you put it in the Facebook or YouTube feed, we will see it here. And we'll get to as many as we can, given time constraints. And we'll verbally, I will ask them, and we will go from there. Okay, so thank you, Yanni, for the comment. Okay. Anyways, I would like to bring out now the candidates for this District 22 City Council. That will be Tiffany Caban, Felicia Kalin, and Edwin Dejesus. Come on out, guys.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. Can everybody hear?
Yes.
Beautiful. Perfect. Okay, good. All right. So again, as you heard, I went through the procedures. Any questions before we start? Anybody have any questions?
No, just thank you for hosting.
I need to know the name of the cat, though, Edwin.
That's my husky Lilo.
Oh, okay. That's a husky. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah. Very good. Okay. Does a husky answer questions also? That's all I need to know.
No. She's my campaign manager, but she doesn't take questions.
Okay. Very good. Okay, so I'm going to start, like I said, with a series of questions here that have to do with our neighborhood. And there is, Victor, is there a clock available or not? Yes. Okay, this will be 90 seconds.
Richard, are we also doing intros? No.
Before we start that, I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves. And they have 2 minutes to give an introduction as to what their campaign's all about. So, Tiffany, if you'd like to start. Nope, we lost you. You're muted.
I was going to say, is that the benefit of having a last name that starts with a C? So good evening, y'all. My name is Tiffany Caban. I'm a public defender, an organizer, and activist. I'm a queer Latina raised by an elevator mechanic and a domestic worker. And I love this community. You know, I came to this work not because I saw injustice or inequity and I wanted to help, but because I lived it, right? It's literally tied to my survival, to the survival of my friends and my family. I'm from a family that grew up in public housing, had exposure to violence, mental health issues, substance use issues, economic insecurity. And it drove the work that I did as a public defender, and it drives the work that I do today. And I'm running for city council because I know that local doesn't mean small. So yes, I'm going to prioritize filling the potholes, picking up the trash, trimming the trees, but I'm also running to be a legislator and set a budget in the largest, most powerful city government in our country. And we've got a lot of work to do. We're facing multiple crises: the pandemic and economic crisis, climate crisis, a crisis around policing and racial justice. But the literal definition of a crisis is a turning point. And we have an opportunity for some solutions scaled to the size of our problems. And so I'll fight for our neighborhood small businesses and working families, champion green initiatives, fight the climate crisis, create good union jobs, fight for a just budget, one that fully funds the things that keep us safe and healthy: housing, healthcare, education, And I'm not just campaigning on ideas. We're living our values. We're doing the work right now. We've been going door to door, helping folks affected by Ida, working with our small businesses, connecting with services. We have been working with directly impacted folks on the conditions on Rikers, testifying against the NRG peaker plant. This is my home. I want to build the safest, healthiest communities possible together, and I'm ready to do it with y'all. So thank you.
Richard, you're muted.
Edwin.
Yes. Hey, everyone. My name is Edwin Dejesus. I'm a lifelong resident of Astoria, Queens, the only candidate in this race to actually grow up in Astoria. I attended PS2, IS 141, and the Academy for Careers in Television and Film, all public schools. I graduated from Columbia University on a full scholarship studying film. And after that, I've done a lot of gig work in the New York City film and television industry as a production assistant. I decided to run for city council about a year ago in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic because I've seen a lot of change over the years. I've seen a lot of local mom and pop shops go out of business due to the greed of large corporations like Amazon. And we know in Queens that we were the epicenter of this pandemic, and too many lives were lost, not just because of this virus, but because of corporate greed. Greed is a virus, and you can see greed manifested in this two-party system, which I believe is the source of our suffering. Both the Democrat and Republican politicians are two sides of the same coin. They're both owned by the special interests of private health insurance companies, big real estate developers, big tech, big pharma, the fossil fuel industry, and Wall Street. That's why I'm running as an independent green candidate this November, because I want to take this working class movement outside of the two-party system and fight for material change for the most vulnerable seniors, disabled community, veterans, students, and low-income residents. So I hope on November 2nd, you can vote for me, Edwin Dejesus, for city council. Not a Democrat, not a Republican, a New Yorker.
Thank you, Edwin. Thanks so much. And last, Felicia Kalin.
Thank you, Richard and OANA, for organizing this forum. My name is Felicia Kalin. I'm a mom of two running for this seat because City Hall has never been more out of touch with hardworking families. I grew up on the principles that I learned from my grandfather, a World War II veteran who helped raise me, that you find what the needs of the community are and then you meet them. And that's why I'm running to be a councilwoman. Right now, we're in need of leaders who will put people first and make sure the government is working for us and not against us. Our safety's on the ballot, our small businesses and our jobs are on the ballot, and the future and well-being of our kids is on the ballot. We need a uniter, someone who understands your struggles and not a divider. And I know tough times. I know what it takes to build something from nothing. I grew up in a struggling single mom household. I've worked since the age of 15 for everything that I have, and I'm ready to rebuild with you. I'll work tirelessly for you and your family with vision and grit. I see a city where our kids can learn to their full potential. I see a city where the people don't have to live paycheck to paycheck because there's an abundance of good paying jobs. I see a city where people can feel safe just walking down the block or taking the train to work. I see a city where you can dream and achieve and start a business without all the hurdles the city throws our way. And I see a city that puts people before politics. If you believe in this vision of everyone working together for something greater than ourselves, then I encourage you to vote me, Felicia Kalin, for city council. It'd be the honor of my lifetime to be your very first city councilwoman in this district and to serve you at City Hall.
Thank you very much. Okay, so now we're going to start with questions, and we're going to begin every question down the road. I'll start with a different person, okay? And I'd like to start with Tiffany. And this first question is having to do with rent and the argument, here it is. The argument of supply and demand is often used as justification for development. This theory has been tested by the pandemic, when increased supply resulted in lower rents, and by the West Village's limited housing stock resulting from the most expensive apartments in the city. Do you think building new rentals is the answer, or should current levels be kept and rents be controlled by legislation or regulation?
Thanks, Richard. First, I want to say that we have to be doing everything in our power to guarantee homes for every person. And that includes building deeply affordable housing and controlling ballooning rent costs through legislation and regulation. So we should be doing both, right? We work with what we have and then also keep building to meet our needs, because we do have a housing crisis here in the district. And it's one that's exacerbated by the fact that at this point, like 2/3 of the properties are being bought up by private equity firms, like, single family and multifamily homes, and real estate developers, and not people or family trying to build some generational wealth. Rent regulation is incredibly important. And I think we've got to do more to ensure there's enough supply of deeply affordable housing. Right now we have around 180,000 vacant and ready to use apartments throughout the city. And that's enough to house every person who's currently experiencing homelessness and then some, right? So, nobody is saying that the city is perfect at housing. It's far, far from it, but we need to invest in more affordable housing stock and pass, legislation guaranteeing everybody a safe home and good repair that's healthy. And unless we regulate, we're going to see more of this really unbelievable sort of apartment warehousing that's driving up rent.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Next, Felicia.
Sure. So absolutely. I believe we need to increase our supply, but we also have to do that maintaining the history and character of our district. The number one priority for me will be building senior housing. I can't tell you the amount of people who've come off the street. My office is on 23rd Avenue. I talked about this yesterday as well, of seniors who are trying to access senior housing. That has to be a priority. We have to expedite senior housing being built and make sure that affordable housing is going to the people who need it most in this community. So yes, we do have to increase our supply. We have to work with the existing units that we already have, making sure they're affordable, and also prioritize senior housing.
Thank you. And Edwin.
Look, Richard, the free market isn't free anymore. It's an illusion of choice, and that's because the game is rigged. And the big real estate developers have all the power because they're in the pockets of the politicians and they're giving them illegal bribes to do their bidding. That's why I'm running outside of the two-party system, because I won't be controlled by these special interests. The big real estate developers are not my masters. If you look around at these affordable housing, $2,000 for a one bedroom, give me a break. That's not affordable, okay? We need to maintain property value through balanced regulation. And most importantly, we need to permanently respect something known as council member deference, where a council member says, we are going to have the priority on whether or not this development or this rezoning gets approved in our district. If you eliminate council member deference, somebody, let's say a council member in Manhattan, can say, let's put a big skyscraper in the middle of Ditmars Boulevard, okay? And Astoria, you just deal with it. That's what happens when you eliminate member deference. You don't want to do that. Unfortunately, my Democrat opponent wants to eliminate it. She has promised to eliminate it. I am hoping very much that we cannot eliminate it and preserve it so that gentrification doesn't increase, so that we don't displace locals through rising rent and skyrocketing food prices. We want to keep the price of a bacon, egg, and cheese at $3.50 a roll. No more. Astoria is not going to become the next Williamsburg. We need to keep our locals here and our culture diverse.
Thank you, Edwin. Okay, next question, and this will start with Felicia. Okay, much of Astoria's housing stock is getting old and with a lack of sustainability and safety. Often the only choice for an owner is to rebuild. What could be done to incentivize owners to renovate to today's standards instead of rebuilding?
Well, I think the good news with that question is that there's some programs that already exist. I think my role as a city councilwoman is to help people facilitate and find those resources because there's a knowledge gap. There is a program through HUD that does give grants to homeowners that are making improvements. I think we can also give tax benefits to home improvements and work together to make sure that we, keep our historical character of our neighborhood intact and make sure that we're subsidizing homeowners to be able to do that.
Thank you. Edwin.
Yes, Richard, we should be giving home improvement tax credits for homeowners so that they can build green homes with wind turbines incorporated into the walls of these buildings and solar panels on the roofs. This is how we can incentivize financially people to commit more renovations instead of just tearing them down, which, by the way, they tore down. This is not a home, for example, but they tore down a bunch of buildings on Ditmars Boulevard where the Key Foods used to be, all union jobs. Now they're building a Target, and there's rats everywhere. I don't think it's a good idea to be constantly knocking down buildings and putting them up. We should incentivize renovation.
And Tiffany.
Yeah, I think that green renovations should be at the top of our priority list in figuring out how to adapt our city to what's our new normal, right? Superstorms, heat waves, really dangerous climate events, while also reducing our carbon footprint so that we can hit our energy goals this decade, and not like when it's too late and don't have a world to leave for our children and our children's children. So, our city's future depends on green existing buildings, not just creating new sustainable buildings. We have to retrofit. We've got to remove the number of permit fees that owners incur when they're making renovations. I mean, we've recently seen the result of old and unsustainable housing and even the past storm, right? Like these damaging and deadly floods. And if you look at NYCHA too, right? Like how many folks have gone without heat, hot water, or gas in general because of crappy boilers, right? And how many seniors have been trapped in their apartment because their elevators are broken again? And so we need the city to renovate too. And we know the city can, as well as incentivize homeowners to renovate. They're doing it right now for those who need to renovate after Hurricane Ida, so like scaling programming and understanding that it has to be part of our day-to-day efforts. And the last thing I'll say is like our current bureaucratic system, it's opaque, it's accessible to folks. And so we've got to make it easier for people to connect with agency representatives and get the support navigating everything, even down to the paperwork.
Yeah, that's one of our jobs at OANA. So, yep. That agency and consumer connection is very important. So, okay, next question. We'll begin with Edwin. Okay, costs of capital projects, especially infrastructure, in the New York City government are significantly higher than in the private sector. The use of union labor and prevailing wage is very important. So how can we otherwise reduce cost of these projects so that they become more affordable for the public?
Yep. We need to cut down on bureaucracy. We need to cut down on the administrative middlemen and women that are operating between the city and the contractors. Take, for example, healthcare, which is human infrastructure, right? A lot of people say, well, if you give people free healthcare, that's going to cost more money. Actually, the system that we have now costs more money than if we had universal healthcare. And here's why. There's a bunch of these administrative middlemen that stand between you and your doctor who are taking in all of the profit for themselves and costing us more and more money each year. The same concept applies to pretty much any type of physical infrastructure and labor as well. We need to increase our amount of union power. For example, Amazon Labor Union, the warehouse workers at Staten Island, led by Chris Smalls. He's a good friend of mine. And I've been down there standing with those workers, fighting for higher wages, fighting for safer working conditions. The problem is too many of these union leaders, they're in the hands of Democratic and Republican Party power players. And these leaders, not the members are wonderful people, but you have corruption at the top. And that corruption is what keeps the status quo the same so that they can stay in power. And they'll actually squash these true revolutionary movements and unions. That's why the Amazon Labor Union, for example, is independent. And we need to strengthen the amount of independent labor unions that we have and help people who want to go on strike to fight for safer working conditions.
Okay. Tiffany?
Yeah, I mean, the question just can't be about cost, but what you're getting for it. And if there's corruption or waste, right, like that's one thing. But if we're talking about living wages and union labor, it's worth it. And that's part of the cost. And we can do things to improve on spending, but the focus should be on the projects like value add, right? There's a reason it's cheaper in the private sector. They exploit workers, they cut corners, they can make it unsafe for everyone involved. And we also provide tax breaks and incentives for private sector and then fail to hold them accountable to deliver what they are expected to based on those tax breaks, right? We don't always get what we're saying that we paid for. And, we need to be looking to budget justice, right? We have the funding for these projects. We just need the political will to invest in them. And I believe that the city's job is to create a dignified workforce that meets our community's needs. And we don't have that right now. And here in Queens, also, for example, like we lead in numbers for most workplace deaths on construction sites. And we're talking about predominantly immigrant neighbors and workers who are going to work one day and then not coming home because the corners are being cut and these safety standards are being ignored. And so if it saves lives, it's worth doing. And we can't cut corners. We have to invest up front now in unionized labor and resilient and sustainable infrastructure. And it's going to save us more money and time and resources in the long run.
Thank you. And Felicia.
Yeah, Richard, I think there's so much corruption really because of one party rule. I'm here to bring accountability. I'm here to steward people's tax dollars well. I think capital projects are a great example of how mismanaged government is. We get stimulus money. It's not being accounted for. I'm also for prioritizing union labor and working with women and minority businesses as well. But we have to, figure out ways to create more price transparency and accountability. It's not good enough for a capital project to say, okay, this is going to cost us $10 billion without giving us, very specific line items to show where the money is going so that we can account for it. So I absolutely believe there's a lot we can push into in this realm. We have a $98 billion budget. I know that you work hard for that budget, or work hard for the tax dollars that you give to the city. And I'm here. My main role is to serve and protect and to steward your tax dollars well. So absolutely, I think we need more accountability. We need to monitor waste and budget exploitation. And if we're all honest, we can point to a lot of corruption when it comes to capital projects. And it has to be, we have to hold people who are in the process accountable, including city agencies.
Okay. Thank you, Felicia. This is actually in the same vein, this question, and it starts with Tiffany. Would you advocate for streamlining funding for affordable housing developments to ensure that the 2 to 3 year wait that currently exists for funds to be accessible does not increase costs passed on to tenants? And how would we address this?
Yeah, could you actually elaborate on that a little bit? Because I want to make sure I'm understanding.
Yeah, what's going on here is basically that if a developer comes in and he applies for city funding for an affordable housing, it takes 2 to 3 years for that funding to be approved. So what tends to happen is that the project sits still and doesn't make any progress. They're paying for financing and things like that. And it's all because of the time wait within the HPD and departments like that. So again, it's part of trying to make it more efficient.
Yeah, I was actually talking about that yesterday, sort of exactly that yesterday morning with our former council member, and about sort of projects and how we use discretionary funding and thinking that a project's going to cost, $200,000-300,000. And because it doesn't get moved quickly enough, 3 years down the line, it gets started and now it's a $600,000 project. And whoa, what the heck happened? And so that goes back to, I don't want to reiterate some of the stuff I said before, but that goes back to my comments on sort of bureaucracy and the opaqueness and making sure that we are putting together a system that is working more efficiently, that agencies are talking to each other and communicating in a more effective manner, and that we're moving more quickly as a body in conjunction with, the council, the speaker, the mayor, our agencies. But for affordable housing, we have to build more deeply affordable housing as rapidly as possible. We have a housing crisis. We have over 800 people in our shelters here in our neighborhood. And these are folks that deserve, good, stable, permanent housing. It's important to make sure that that money is not misspent, the process abused by wealthier nonprofit corporations. But there's good reason to streamline those processes so long as we do it in a community-driven way, right? There's also good reason to look at every local option we have to use, update and build on what we already have. One way to do this, a public bank. If we do the work on the state level, there's a way to make sure we get funds out the door at better rates without navigating a bunch of hurdles and hoops that are built into the private banking system. We could get money and things out so much more quickly. And we've seen models of it around the country that have actually demonstrated that.
Okay, thank you. I want to interject something here. And part of these questions come because it's important to me. I was 11 years a parks chair on the community board here. And there was one project when we were trying to build a performance area around the pool in Astoria Park. And when it was passed, we had enough money and a $4 million budget to do it. By the time everything got approved and it got to actually start the construction, that $4 million just built a deck. Nothing else was built. And it's basically, the budget to complete the project by the time they started it would have been $9 million. So that's one example of what we're talking about here, and similar to what you were talking about on a lot of capital projects. And beyond that too, I also want to mention that within the Parks Department, we tried to get a comfort station built in Whitey Ford Field. And we were told by the Parks Department that would cost $5 to $6 million to put in the bathroom. And I've just, all I can tell you is that I find that number obscene, and I think it's ridiculous. So that's my comments, and this is why I'm bringing up these subjects, because they're very, very important to me personally from my life experience.
Those are two things I learned recently, by the way, how expensive it is to fix bathrooms in public parks, and the other thing that blew my mind is how expensive it is to plant a tree.
Yep. Well, if you want to, no, I won't even get into it. Felicia?
Yeah, I think transparency is always a good thing. Efficiency is always a good thing. I wouldn't want to speed up the ULURP process so much that it wouldn't allow for community input, but I think on both sides we would benefit, especially if we're taking away money from the community by slowing down the approval process. As much as we can put back into the community, I think that's a good thing. So absolutely, I'm all for transparency and efficiency.
And Edwin.
Yes, Richard. I think the time. Oh, there we go.
Oh.
I think it was Albert Einstein who said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting similar results. Mm-hmm. So every time that we continue voting for Democrat and Republican politicians, we're voting for the people who put us in this mess that we're in. And that's the problem with this two-party system, is that we're always promised all of these beautiful things every election cycle, and then it's ultimately always abandoned. And you cannot shoehorn a working class movement into a corporate party. You cannot force rights for workers into a corporate party like the Democrat or Republican parties. You can't change the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party changes you, at least when you're running for office. And that's why they're owned by the big real estate developers. And what we need to do is stop putting the burden financially, physically, emotionally on the residents and put it back on the government. For example, de Blasio wants restaurant workers to be at the front lines of being the COVID police. Why should the small mom and pop shops bear the burden of that responsibility when, by the way, you can go into TJ Maxx or any other big box store without proof of vaccination, packed in like sardines? That's because a lot of our policies are driven by power, control, profit. The bottom line is always making money. So that's why we have to take this movement outside of the two-party system. Vote for a third-party candidate like myself, Edwin Dejesus.
Okay, thank you, Edwin. Okay. This next question, again, I think I should probably elaborate on this a little bit also. I've been involved in the ULURP process for a number of years, and one of the most difficult things that I've gone through is the fact I'm asked to vote on projects, and I am never told what the financials are. One side will come in and say they can't build the project unless they get the zoning change. The other side says that, in fact, if they get the zoning change, they're just pocketing the money. But we never get real numbers. So OANA, we had put together a proposal, which I had sent to each of you, if you had a chance to read them, about having the controller's office come into each community board and get figures from developers and as to justifying why they want this increase in bulk with an increase in income, and use a comptroller's office as a third party to interpret the numbers for the community board members, since they're not accountants. So anyways, I'd like to know what your opinion on that, if you happen to have read it, what you think about that. Start with Felicia on that.
Sure. So I think, it echoes similar to what I was saying before with the last question, but I think transparency is always a good thing. I think working with the comptroller's office to help with the data interpretation would make sense. I think there's just a lot of, when it comes to navigating city agencies, there's a lot of outdated systems. There's a lot that we can do to make sure that our systems are more efficient and that the community board is working collectively with other city agencies. I think this is a great way to start that process. And again, I know that the upfront costs of the ULERP process can be expensive. I would, if there's any cost savings, that should go back into the community. But yeah, I think making the process better is always a good thing. But I am 100% for fighting for the community, making sure that the history and character of the neighborhood stays intact and that we're not displacing people or trying to speed up a process, so that it doesn't allow for community input. But yeah, I think, working with a comptroller's office would make sense on this one.
Edwin.
Yep, I agree with Felicia on that. We do need increased transparency. We do need to increase the amount of audits initiated by the comptroller's office to make sure that everything is in order and not being dictated, again, by greed or profit motives. And if you look around right now and we talk about where can we get, these sources of funding, where is the money at? Let's take a look at Amazon, for example. Their vans drive all over the neighborhood, sometimes pretty dangerously. Did you know that Jeff Bezos paid $0 in federal income tax in 2018, and yet he's dominating our city streets? Why is the richest man in the world paying less in taxes than people like my mother, for example, who work paycheck to paycheck in a local warehouse that's going out of business due to the monopolization that Amazon has over the market? No hazard pay, worked every single day during this pandemic. People like her are suffering and getting nothing in return. Literally, I mean, everyone else got benefits, but if you were an essential worker, you got screwed. You deserve to be compensated. And it should be our job to make sure that we extinguish wealth and income inequality, because right now that's at an all-time high. And that is the reason for so many of our problems, including the increase in crime, the increase in anger. I don't know if you've walked outside lately, but people are all mad at each other and they just want to fight. They're already at level 8, when you first meet them. That's because our economic conditions are so poor because of the failure of this two-party system.
And Tiffany.
Yeah, thank you. I know I sound like a broken record on this, but we need more streamlined open communication and collaboration across agencies and offices. I personally have a great relationship with the Democratic nominee for Comptroller, Brad Lander, and I supported him because I know he agrees with me and y'all in the sense that we want more transparency to our fiscal system here in New York City. And it's also important to remember that the zoning needs to be driven by what communities want, and transparency in that application process is critical, right, to helping communities evaluate what's best and what's best for them. So these applications need to include financial data and also, right, beyond that, even racial impact statements, in addition to existing requirements like environmental impact statements. We shouldn't be allowing private developers to continue to extract wealth from our communities while not providing anything for the community members who have been here. And we should be requiring data that shows meaningful investment in our communities. And also some of this goes back to the ULEP process, right? Like really paradigm shifting and flipping it on its head. It's outdated, it's purely reactive, it's heavily weighted towards developer interests rather than having the process be centered on community, where we ideate the projects and development we want and bring it to developers and they meet that, rather than them coming with their big money making plan and having us fight over scraps and crumbs. And so I think a comprehensive planning process would ensure that all members of our communities, and not corporate interests and developers, have the opportunity to proactively plan their neighborhoods. I mean, there's so many other things to talk about there, but I want to be respectful of time.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're going to pivot to another conversation here now. We've done a lot on affordability. But I'd like to go into transportation now. Public transportation is scarce in the direct north-south corridor connecting Queens to Brooklyn. Some previous proposals included the BQX. Do you think a light rail like the BQX combined possibly even with the air train or something along those lines could be put together to create a corridor of north-south transit, public transit? And that would start with Edwin.
Yep. My opinion is no. I think the air train, I'm actually glad that it died because I think it would have been very well underutilized and would have cost a lot of money relative to how many people would have actually been using it. You know, I know Senator Dejesus has proposed putting an air train over the Grand Central Parkway, but again, take a look at the Van Wyck Expressway, also underutilized air train over a highway. Meanwhile, you have the beautiful M60 bus right alongside, adjacent to that highway on Astoria Boulevard that goes to and from the airport. Why don't we use the M60 select service bus as a model for creating a gigantic fleet of electric buses that go to and from Brooklyn and Queens? That would be pretty amazing. And I'll just say this, in terms of the light rail, I thought it was a great idea on the surface, the BQX, but especially for something that could be along Vernon Boulevard, for example, going into Long Island City. But again, I do think that would cost a lot of money and be underutilized, especially because we have now a gigantic increase of bicycle usage. And I also believe that if you want to get to the airport, this is something that Delta Airlines used to actually provide back in the day. They would have a ferry service from Wall Street to LaGuardia. I mean, let's utilize our waterways. That's a pretty awesome way of getting around is by boat over to LaGuardia Airport, and it wouldn't increase traffic congestion whatsoever, and it would also help the green agenda.
Okay, and Tiffany?
I don't think so. Is my short answer. We need more public transportation, but it's got to prioritize transit deserts and marginalized communities, right? This is about equity, and it needs to be a participatory process, not one that's driven from the top down. The answer will be a community-driven one. And here's what I know about the air train, right? Like, it would be one of the world's most costly transit options and serve far, far too many people, right? That's a horrible use of our resources. There's widespread opposition to the plan, right? Like, over 60% of the public comments that were collected were in strong opposition to it. And there were all of these alternative proposals that were rejected. And I don't know, I'm going to be really honest, I don't know a ton about the BQX, but here's what I do know. It's a proposed streetcar that would connect neighborhoods along the 11-mile corridor from Red Hook to Astoria. And my question is really what's the purpose? My understanding is it runs where the G train runs. So to me, the purpose is a little bit unclear, but I do know that our answer to this has to be grounded in climate justice and environmental impacts, as well as equity, ensuring that public transit options, ensuring those public transit options, particularly for those who haven't historically had access. And there's a community input process about expanding the bus network from Brooklyn to Queens with the bus network redesign. I support having that 21st Street bus lane, which is also ranked very high on the DOT evaluation process for bus lane expansion. So we've got a lot of work to do.
Okay. One thing quickly I'd like to say, maybe you're interpreting this question wrong or I didn't write it correctly, but what I was saying was if a light rail was created to go between Queens and Brooklyn, that not the actual air train, but this would actually serve the same purpose of the air train of getting people to the airport if there was a stop on it at the airport. But anyways, Felicia, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm against the air train as well. I do think that we need to look into ways that we can connect Queens and Brooklyn more. My husband actually used to work in Brooklyn, and it was quite a commute to get from Astoria to Dumbo. But I know there's some people who, might work in Brooklyn or work in Queens and live in Brooklyn, vice versa. I think that there's a lot that we can do to connect our two boroughs. And also, everybody wants to come to Astoria, right? It's a great place to eat. It's a great place to shop at some of our local places. So any way we can get people to come into our commercial districts is a great thing. But yeah, I wouldn't support an air train. It doesn't really benefit our community as much. And I think we could explore projects that connect Queens to Brooklyn. I agree with what Edwin said earlier. We can do that via express buses in a more, cost-efficient manner.
Okay. Okay, Tiffany, the next question will be for you, starting with you. And this is speaking of your meeting yesterday morning with our prior councilman. How will you build upon Costa Constantinides' initiatives in improving our parks, playgrounds, and green spaces? He did a great job. What additional capital projects would you like to see that might improve our recreational space?
This is exactly why I do those meetings on a regular basis, Richard. Like, there's two parts to this question. And for me, there's like the obvious logistical, the nuts and bolts of like, how do you build upon his initiatives? But you do your homework, right? You find out what he's been working on, what's in the works, where money is sitting and projects haven't started, where it makes sense to expand and build on existing projects. But greening as much of our city as possible not only improves our environment, it also improves our health and neighborhood stability. And when neighborhoods are greener, they're also safer, which is proven by empirical evidence. I know that there was a ton of money put into Astoria Park. There's money for improvements on Gorman Playground, because our district, by the way, doesn't only include Astoria. There are other neighborhoods in our district. And we need to make sure that those projects are started and completed as soon as possible. It's also important that we focused on what people need when we make parks, like basics like restrooms, Wi-Fi, grassy space, recreational space for kids, and overall accessibility. Especially for folks who have, some sort of a physical disability or our elderly community. And then we can also double up and invest in things like farmers markets, especially in areas that are food deserts, and draw folks to green spaces that aren't being used enough, and also expand the capacity and use of those green spaces. But also we need to be like really creative and get it where we can. So even investing, if there's a little bit of space for like a micro park, doing that, right? The small bench with a few trees in an area that can't support a full park, like those things have really good benefits, because every tree, every blade of grass in our city matters. So we've got to stop relying on outrageously expensive private companies, and these tasks should be in our parks department as well.
Good. Okay. Felicia.
Yeah, I'm a Teddy Roosevelt kind of Republican. I love parks. I love green space. I'm glad that Costa prioritize our parks. I would continue to do that. I have 2 young kids. We go to our parks all the time. I have so many stories of one of my kids needing to use the bathroom. We go to find a bathroom. There's no bathroom there. So yeah, we absolutely have to add bathrooms to our parks. We need to, make the Astoria waterfront even better than it already is. There's a lot of an investment we can make there. I also want to highlight a baseball field in our district, Elm Jack Field. It needs a lot of love. It's a great open space, but it needs some investment. So definitely, continuing to build upon the legacy of our former councilman in making green space, prioritizing that. I'll also say that, again, I'm not for Rikers Island closing. I'm not really for, the renewable Rikers plan, but I would 100% be on board if the city did push through closing down Rikers, that we would just preserve that as a green space for the community. So absolutely, I'll keep prioritizing investing in our green spaces.
Thank you, Felicia. And Edwin.
Yep. No, and I'm glad Felicia mentioned Elm Jack. ICYP as well. That's where I used to play Little League. Don't want to brag, but we won the World Series that year. I do think that we need to have more benches, more tables, more trash bins, especially. Trash is piling up. If you walk around specifically near like the entrance to where the Triborough Bridge is, there's like no trash cans and there's nowhere to throw your garbage out. And you're almost incentivizing people to litter at that point because they can't carry around their trash. So please don't litter, but also let's have some more trash cans and public restrooms as well, because that's really important, not just here in Astoria and Queens, East Elmhurst, Jackson Heights, Woodside, but New York City at large. And I think something that's massively overlooked are our playgrounds. Our children have been going through a lot of suffering for this past year and a half. They've been put through a lot of stress that's going to affect their long-term development. We should be really reinvigorating our playgrounds. They just did a playground here at Astoria Park. I don't know if you've seen it, but they chose the color scape as gray. I think we should be adding a lot more color for our children because that does significantly impact their mental health. And I remember growing up at the 48th Street Park on 20th Avenue, where we had this beautiful big jungle gym, so many memories, but they took it away. I also think we could have public pianos, which is something we had in Astoria Park pretty recently. And also, here's an idea. Why don't we turn Shore Boulevard into a night market where we can encourage local vendors to come in, sell their goods, sell their food, and have the community actually come together?
Thank you, Edwin.
I really love all the Little League connections, by the way. I coach Little League at Elm Jack and grew up playing in the Astoria Baseball League. Everybody's got love for Little League.
Good. Okay, next question, Felicia. Okay, New York, and this is a parks question also. New York City parks spending has hovered around 0.05% of the annual budget. And that number falls many millions short of what is necessary to do all the capital improvements and operational things like picking up trash that we need to do. And what many other cities spend to support robust parks workforce and secure equitable 21st century system of spaces and playgrounds. Does the candidates support increasing the parks budget to 1%?
Yeah, I think we already established I love parks, so I would be 100% on board with that. And I want to point out a particular park that needs a lot of love, Hoyt Playground. There's a lot of problems there. There's a lot of trash. There's a lot of people who are riding motorized scooters there. There's a lot of attention for several of our parks, and absolutely, I would increase the budget by 1%. Make some of the improvements that we talked about in the previous question. I would be on board with that. And I've already been doing that work, identifying the needs in the community. We've had 30 plus pickups. Hoyt Playground, I was just with a mom who has a vision for a mural there. So I'm absolutely invested in, I'll make sure our parks are well taken care of. And getting the trash. The trash is all over the place. And we need to replace trash bins. And we also, again, this is another city agency, we have to make sure that the Parks Department is cleaning up our parks adequately. We're really concerned there's been an increase in drug use. And I think that's going to be even more of an issue. The other candidates, I believe both of them want to legalize all drugs, and that's going to make huge quality of life issues, especially in our parks. So we need to, make sure that we keep our parks clean.
Edwin.
I never said I would legalize all drugs. I'm in favor of decriminalization, which is very different. Particularly for psilocybin and its mental health ramifications. But in terms of parks, I would say we need to at least double or triple that percentage of the budget. I was endorsed by the Green Party of New York, who actually wrote the original Green New Deal back in 2006, before it was co-opted and watered down by the Democratic Party. I think it's very important that we replenish our trees through tree mulching, storm prevention measures, and increasing the amount of composting sites that we have. Astoria Pug, for example, they have this little space under the Queensboro Bridge, the 59th Street Bridge, which is awesome, but we should definitely be able to do more because that's one of the biggest ways that we can combat this climate crisis. And by the way, the more we pollute this earth, we're not really killing the planet, we're killing ourselves. Mother Nature, Earth will be here if we're all, bring ourselves to extinction. The planet's still going to be here. It's just us who's going to be gone. So we need to be fighting for our children and our children's children, especially my generation. I'm 24 years old. If I have kids, they're going to be, at high school age in like 2040, so this is something that we have to act on very urgently. And it's all connected because if we do increase the amount that our youth is going around and doing these street cleanups, with community leaders, they'll feel more of a sense of community and compassion and love and be less likely to commit crimes like gun and gang violence in the future. So it's all connected.
Thank you, Edwin. And Tiffany.
Yeah, I am all for investing in our parks and increasing that budget. And again, when you think about how big the budget is, it's still a finite budget. And so that means reallocation of resources, and it's got to come from somewhere. And so I'm certainly in favor of divesting from a bloated police budget and investing in things like our parks, schools, hospitals. But we should be investing in parks and every measure available to us that improves our environment, because it's a critical component of being able to adapt and mitigate climate change. We have to expand our parks and green space budgeting, including creating a locally hired conservation corps that's focused on environmental support. It's actually part of my public safety plan because they're intertwined. We have a conservation corps at the state level. We're trying to establish one at the federal level. It only makes sense to have one at the city level. It would create good green union jobs, would address local environmental problems, and work with community members to identify areas for improvement. And they can help maintain parks and work to educate and reach out to community members to maximize like the work that we're doing to try to save our city. And, they could also work alongside community members to identify like bad repeat polluters, including corporations, and improve accountability. You can check that out on my website. It's under both our Green New Deal and public safety plan. And then just adding as many trees, park spaces, and gardens areas as possible. Some of that budget, that parks budget, is used to maintain and support spaces like Big Reuse, which isn't just some small spot, but like it is a world-class composting site, right? And so using those funds to expand things like that as well.
Thank you, Felicia. Okay, or excuse me, Tiffany. Felicia?
Yeah,
Okay.
so
Yeah.
I answered the question.
You answered the question already. So the next question, okay. This will be for Edwin. Each of you, if you win, are going to be very focused on getting your agenda passed in the council. However, historically, many bills, even if passed, do not succeed because of poor administration from either agencies or the executive department. How do you plan on making sure that bureaucracy does not negate the work you're doing? Examples go from Sandy, the build back from Sandy, to the pandemic rent resources that were not, in fact, dispersed on an equitable basis and took months to get any of it to move. So, Edwin?
Yeah, well, you're asking someone who's running as a third-party candidate. So, who am I accountable to? Just you, the residents of District 22. I don't have corporate masters. There's no political party leaders who are going to be in my ear telling me, oh, you have to do this, you have to do that. No, we're only accountable to the people. It's the Democrat and Republican politicians that are part of the establishment, that are part of the machine. And you can go in there and say, well, I'm going to fight and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. It's not going to happen because it's the leadership that directs the party's platform. So you can try fighting it through incrementalism, but that doesn't work. This movement needs to be taken outside of the two-party system. That's how we're going to get things done. Because my goal is to not just go in there and water myself down and do what's most politically convenient so that I can, climb up the political career ladder. That's not what I'm in here to do. I'm here to fight. I'm here to actually bring the ruckus. And I will go as far as blocking bills unless they actually create material change for the working class. I'm here to play hardball. And there's no politician, no mayor, or no one in the state legislature or even in Congress who's going to be able to tell us what we can do. Again, I'm going to fight for you as your public servant, and you can hold me accountable, and I will always be accessible. I will always have my office open, and you can always ask me questions at any time. Heck, my cell number's on my website at edwinfornyc.com. Give me a call.
Okay. Tiffany?
Yeah, oversight is a pillar function of the council. We talk all the time about the budget, the legislative function, the land use, but oversight is a big function too. And if we're not holding public hearings regularly on these issues, if we're not doing that oversight function, then critical work is not going to get done right. And so I'm really excited about the oversight function of this future role, right? Like, I'm a former public defender. I am a trial attorney by trade. I miss being in a courtroom and cross-examining and asking those really hard questions. Oversight is, not a lever that's talked about enough or used enough, quite frankly, within the city council and around the city. But this is a really serious and important tool that we have, and I intend to use it a lot. And we need to reevaluate the ways that we enforce our laws and regulations. Part of this is reviewing how our laws and regulations are currently enforced. So, for example, it came up once before, but the Democratic nominee for comptroller has promised to conduct a full audit of city agencies to make sure that public money is being spent with public health in mind, right? We also need to look at our statutory accountability measures, right? It is by no means the sexiest thing, but we have laws and rules that create the scope in which a bureaucracy functions. And we need to reevaluate those and make sure that there are true accountability and oversight measures.
Thank you. And Felicia.
Yeah, so nobody's going to get more frustrated about bureaucracy than myself, and I'm going to be fighting hand in hand with people here in District 22. We do need more agency oversight and accountability, but this job is also about relationships. We need to work well with whoever wins the mayoral race, and I'm happy to work with whoever wins to make sure that my district is well represented, that we cut through the red tape together. And I'll be accessible. I have been accessible. My office is right here on 23rd Avenue. People come in, and we've already worked together on solutions. Hurricane Ida, we've been out in the community, making sure people know how to access resources. And we'll continue to do that work when I'm your councilwoman. So absolutely, we will fight hand in hand the bureaucracy, and we'll work together to make sure we can improve our system, specifically if you're a small business owner. I know how difficult it is for you. I've sat down and chatted with whether it be the 30th Avenue Business Association or some small business owners here, and how difficult it is to run a business. And, even with the vaccine mandates, that being given to small business owners after all that they have gone through, it's just another issue that they have to navigate. And so we'll work together to work through these things and make sure that your needs are well met.
Thank you. Thank you. Next question is for Tiffany. Okay. And this is often when the city cannot find a solution to a problem. Historically, they've just dumped the problem in the NYPD's lap, even issues that the NYPD may not be the best fit for. How would you adjust agency responsibilities so that our laws are properly enforced and each agency's responsibilities fit their strengths?
We criminalize poverty, we criminalize mental health, we can criminalize substance use, and then we don't provide the infrastructure to actually address these problems, and we throw it all to police. We spend 3 times more on incarceration and policing than we do on public health. And so fully funding and scaling non-police public health infrastructure is absolutely essential in making our communities both safer and healthier. And that includes violence interrupters, family supports, wraparound and holistic services for young folks, mental health care, community centers, healthcare responders. That's how we build towards stable, safe communities, not more policing. Right now, police are often tasked with responding to non-criminal incidents, including traffic, mental health, homelessness, neighborhood level conflict. And these incidents can often be addressed by healthcare workers, social workers, Department of Transportation, community-based organizations doing good violence prevention work or other community care work. By fully funding the public health infrastructure and services that keep us safe and healthy, housing, healthcare, education, we can solve a lot of these problems without involving law enforcement, right? So we can properly scale organizations like community capacity development, already doing the work to address root causes of violence and mediating conflict. And to do those things right, we have to dramatically shrink the NYPD and incarceration system so that we can send resources to the agencies and workers and personnel that are better equipped to handle this range of issues that people are experiencing, rather than, funding high altitude surveillance drones and robotic dogs and surveillance equipment. We can do so much better.
Felicia.
Yeah, I think we can invest in crime prevention and public health without defunding our police. We have a $98 billion budget. The actual operating budget of the NYPD is about 5.7% of our budget. So the majority of the NYPD budget, or at least half, is going to pensions. So I think that there's certainly things that we can always do to improve, to make sure our systems are better. But I'm not a defund the police candidate. I want to make sure that our neighborhoods are safe and clean. And I think it's important to know that when we divest from the NYPD, we're taking one less officer. We're taking an officer off the street. So that means if I call, 911, it might take 30 minutes for an officer to get to my home rather than 10 minutes. And each delay is a potential life. And so we need to absolutely do the work in crime prevention, funding other organizations that are working on the ground, making sure public health is taken care of. All of those things are important. I'm not saying that, but we also, with a $98 billion budget, should be investing in public safety, making sure that our community stays safe. And that will continue to be a priority for me. And I think that's just the largest differentiator in this particular race is just our outlook on public safety. And I'll continue to fight for safety in this neighborhood.
Edwin.
Yeah, I don't think the NYPD should be expected to keep a lid on all of society's problems. And heck, if you want to stop crime, maybe don't promise the American people a $2,000 stimulus check and then lie and then give them $1,400, because that's how you anger people, and that's why they start breaking things and stealing. That's why I propose a universal basic income, because again, not all of crime is because of poverty, but a good chunk of it originates with poverty. If you extinguish that, and again, we have more than enough money to end homelessness. We have more than enough money to end poverty. You're going to disincentivize a lot of crime. And if we live in a more safe and just society, there wouldn't be a reason to have so many police on the streets. And by the way, why are the NYPD tasked with dealing with minor traffic violations? Can't that be something the Department of Transportation does, so that the police can be dealing with active shooters and people who are hurt, committing acts of violence against women and children? Shouldn't that be more important? What about placard abuse? It's being abused all the time. That should be something also enforced by the Department of Transportation more actively. And I'm willing to work with anyone who's going to help end the war on drugs, because why is it that during this deadly pandemic, marijuana was deemed an essential business, selling marijuana in other states? Yet here in New York, we still have people disproportionately African-American, Latino-American still locked up for it. If we end the war on drugs, we could have significantly less jail and prison population. So these are just common sense policies. And again, as a political outsider, I can get them done.
Thank you. Okay, this next question, and I'll start with Felicia, is a quality of life question, and something that's bothered me for many, many, many years. To me, one of the most evasive physical and mental eyesores on the streets of Astoria are all the overhead wires. If you ever walk down our streets, the cables make you feel closed in and they're visually unappealing. They seem to multiply before our eyes. And if you walk down the street where cables are buried, there's a feeling of openness, and it's really appealing. Do you agree that we should require cables, number one, to be removed when unused? Right now, the companies just leave them up. They don't remove the old ones. And number two, eventually require all cables to be buried? And if so, how would we go about this?
Yeah, I think you pointed out there's a lot of quality of life issues here in the neighborhood. I agree. I'm someone who wants to walk down the street. The streets are clean. We don't have cables sticking out. I think that's an important issue and a safety issue as well. So absolutely, if there's a cable that's not being used, let's get it down. I think moving forward, we can build cables under the ground. I do know it's costly. I think it's something like 5 to 7 times more expensive to put cables underground. So we would have to work within the budget constraints that we have. But I agree, and that would be something that I would like to see as well.
And Edwin.
Yeah. So Con Edison, which is constantly trying to keep polluting our air more and more, they're making tons of money. Maybe we should get some of that money to fund putting these wires underground, for example. And, these wires, it's not just for cosmetic reasons, it's safety reasons as well. We need to prevent any injuries from severe weather catastrophes. I've seen a lot of trees fall over the year, not just from Hurricane Ida, but other weather catastrophes that we've had. Transformer fires as well. I think we all remember that time where there was that giant green light in the sky coming from a transformer, and it looked like we were being invaded by aliens. I mean, that's not normal. That's really bad stuff. That's going to hurt us. We need to municipalize our energy infrastructure, otherwise known as public power. And this all comes with modernizing our technology. And again, we should use those fossil fuel industry profits to pay for any of these expenditures that we need to make that's going to help people. And again, not increase the amount of suffering that they have or furthering their respiratory illness. Someone like my father who's asthmatic, the more that you hurt people's lungs, the more susceptible they become to hospitalization or death from COVID-19. Again, it's all connected. And it really is about taking our freedoms back. Because again, the Democratic and Republican parties, they're playing within the 40-yard line. And one's on the defensive line for the ruling class. The other's on the offensive line for the ruling class. Vote independent.
And Tiffany.
Yeah, I mean, I am all for, making our neighborhood as beautiful as possible. But like even more important than that to me is that like we're taking, steps to improve our environment because again, we have to. This is like the most immediate existential crisis we have. And so for that reason alone, we have to be burying these power lines. We got to remove them when they're unused, require all these cables to be buried. It's a climate resiliency action that has to be taken. And this is also a budget justice issue, right? This is about making sure we're putting our money and funds where it matters. Many of the quality of life issues that we see, like bad power lines, potholes, things like that, like are because we have invested our resources in the things that don't uplift our neighborhood. And they're also connected to the climate crisis and what we are doing and not doing to combat it. So those are funds that we can use to pave more of our streets. We can be reallocating funding to use funds to modernize our public transit, working at every level of government, obviously, right? From federal to state to local dollars, creating dedicated bus lanes in areas like 21st Street, powering more of our neighborhood using solar. And we can modernize our power infrastructure by investing in a renewable Rikers. I support public power without a doubt. But renewable Rikers would allow us to build our electrical infrastructure underground instead of having outdated overhanging power lines. And we'd be able to get rid of every single dirty polluting power peaker plant in the process. And so, all of these things are possible when we start rethinking our budgetary priorities.
Good. Okay. Next, speaking of solar power, this is for Edwin. Okay. Should the city be required to replace all city and parks lights and signals with solar powered lights? Also, because federal funding may be in jeopardy, should the city fund the installation of electric car charging stations? How should the sites be determined? And should they bill to the customer or provided free of charge?
Yes, we should be installing more solar lights. And here's the thing. On one hand, we have a party that doesn't believe climate change is real. On the other hand, we have a party that says it's real, but does absolutely nothing about it. Little tiny drops in the bucket, little incremental measures as if we have the time to be making those. It's almost even worse when you say, we, the Democratic Party, believe in climate change, but, here's a little life raft, even though the boat is sinking. I'd rather be stabbed in the front than be stabbed in the back. Because what you're doing when you're doing that, not only are you funneling all of this young progressive energy into a corporate party and, having them vote for these corporate politicians who take illegal bribe money from the fossil fuel industry, for example, but you're having them become complacent and pacified and suppressing their activism when you actually pretend to fight for climate change. But at the end of the day, you're giving tax abatements to companies like ExxonMobil in that Democrat version of the Green New Deal. So I think companies like ExxonMobil should be able to pay for this. And I think it should be very affordable to charge an electric car. And as we do transition away from fossil fuels, then we can end up making it free again with that money that we're giving to these large corporations who don't care about us. And by the way, as somebody who is identifying as a Green Party candidate, I'm the only one who's actually proposed this, taking energy from the East River through tidal power, which is much stronger and more efficient than just solar and wind. Creating an array of those. We already have them by Roosevelt Island, just 3 of them. Imagine if we had hundreds of them. We could power the whole city and more cost effectively and saving our environment at the same time. from the East River Hydropower.
Tiffany.
Yeah, I think our city should be funding green infrastructure that's accessible to the largest amount of folks. And so that means things like public transportation, and, we can do installation of electric car charging stations. It also means doing everything in our power to cut carbon expenditure, including going solar, like wherever possible. And so there are two ways that we can combat the climate crisis, right? Like we need this broad level systemic infrastructure changes made by our city, and we need individuals to change their habits. And by changing the systemic structures, we make it easier for people to change their personal habits too, right? We have to incentivize it. We have to make it easy. We have to make it appealing. And so as a council member, my main focus and role would be to help change the systemic infrastructure by making those investments in more public transportation, investing in green public transportation so that folks feel more inclined to make that personal choice to use it. And the window is really, really small here, right? Like the clock is ticking in terms of climate justice. And so, the one thing I'll say is that, it being, well, you know what? I won't say it. Never mind. I won't say it. But yeah, I think we have to invest in that green infrastructure, and we have to build really power and consensus around being able to do that.
Okay, and Felicia.
Yeah, I think sustainability is an important issue. I think climate change is an important issue. Regardless of what Edwin said, it's something I do care about as well. I'm a mom. I care about the air that my children are breathing in their lungs. I also have asthma as well. So it's an important issue, and I think absolutely more moving towards sustainability through solar power. I think that's a great idea. Having electric charge stations, I think that's great. I would personally pass that bill to the individual. I think if you can afford the luxury of a vehicle, then that's something that you could pay for as well. But I think sustainability is an important topic. I think it's something that we can work together across the aisle on, at a city level, state level, national level. That's the vision that I have. So absolutely, let's work together and build a better neighborhood and a more sustainable neighborhood.
Thank you. And the last question in this section, U.S. News rated 5 Astoria Long Island City schools best in the state, including PS 122, which was rated #1 middle school in New York and has a gifted and talented program. Equity in all schools is important, but do you think ending G&T programs may have a negative effect for Astoria students? And that's for Tiffany.
Yeah, I don't. I was a G&T kid myself, and I fully support ending the G&T program. We have the most segregated school system in the country, and there's such a disparity in educational outcomes. And so I believe every kid deserves a fully funded public education system that gives them support and holistic care they need to thrive, right? Like we shouldn't be celebrating winners and losers and pitting schools against one another. We have to invest resources in our schools where every student, those, no matter how you learn, no matter what particular thing you excel at, no matter how much support you need in certain areas, will have access to learning in a way that is best suited for them. And so coming out of the pandemic even, right, like we need to help our kids be healthy. It means more access to or prioritizing social emotional learning and spaces that are going to contribute to mental health, more guidance, more restorative justice capacity, more opportunities and pathways for learning so that kids have a real chance to recover and succeed and grow no matter where you live. I'm going to prioritize our Astoria students, our students in the district, but that goes beyond our schools. We need a holistic approach, right? Because supporting our students means supporting our families. I was a chronic absentee student as a kid. It wasn't because I didn't care about school, I wasn't smart, it's because I was struggling at home. And so we need to support families if we're going to support our students, and that's only going to have a positive effect. So supporting things like New York Kids Rise is making sure that people have money to go to college, supporting groups like Zone 126 that increases attendance and provides wraparound family support. Right, those things as well.
Okay, Felicia.
I absolutely believe that we should be keeping our gifted and talented programs. I think we should incentivize, our students to learn at their best full potential. And this is just a very clear example of why the mayor should not have control over our children's education and future. We need a school board. We need accountability for Bill de Blasio to make a credence as soon as he is about to leave office, not only with this particular topic, but others as well. It goes to show that we need some accountability. So I would absolutely preserve the G&T programs. I've talked to parents at PS 122. Their children work very hard, and I want to keep that school and that program for those children and parents. My kids are not in a G&T program. I didn't choose that path of education for them. We love our school and we're invested there, but I absolutely think that it's important that we keep our gifted and talented programs for the hardworking students that they've worked really hard where they're at, and we should keep the program. And expand it, by the way. Make it better so it's more accessible to more students.
Okay, thank you so much. And Edwin.
Yes, you know how in the beginning of The Twilight Zone they say, imagine if you will, a world where Mayor de Blasio has control over our schools. Well, that's the reality, and I do agree with Felicia that we should eliminate mayoral control of schools. There's no reason somebody like Bill de Blasio should be in charge of our children. And yes, I think it was a bad idea to eliminate gifted and talented. In fact, I would have expanded the program. It shouldn't be all or nothing. Let's give more opportunities to our children and acknowledge that there are different levels of talent. That's a fact. You know, I attended public school in this district my whole life. PS2 in East Elmhurst or Jackson Heights area. 141, IS 141 next to Habibi Deli, Einstein Academy represent. And I also attended the Academy for Careers in Television and Film, which is a public school, part of the city's career and technical education program, which means, yes, we learned academics, but we also learned a specialized subject such as film. We need to be expanding that so that we can also teach our children skilled trades like filmmaking, like culinary arts, like construction, so that when they graduate from high school, they don't have to go into thousands of dollars in debt in college. They can go out of high school and get a job with job training programs and job database programs, which we could also extend to our homelessness population as well and help them get jobs as well. And so I think it's, pretty crazy that, Caban agrees with getting rid of G&T. I think it's something that we should have kept and expanded.
Thank you. And that's the end of our first section. Thank you all. Did a great job. Appreciate it. And now this next section is for quick answers. We want to see if you can keep them down to yes or no answers or just one sentence answers if possible. Okay. I know that it's difficult, but let's see if the best we can do. Okay. The first question would be, small business is often hindered in New York City by numerous violations from city agencies that cost not only fines, but lost time doing business. We have proposed that a grace period be established for most violations, and if the business cures the issue within that time, that the fine would be forgiven. Do you agree? We'll start with Tiffany.
Yes, we lost like 40% of our small businesses here. We have to support our small businesses, move away from punitive fine systems, and work with them to make sure that they're compliant and that we're helping them stay in business.
Thank you, Felicia.
Yes, absolutely. The small businesses are navigating over 6,500 rules and regulations. We have to streamline processes to make it easier to have a business. Absolutely, yes.
And Edwin.
Yes. These large corporations, they're destroying the culture of places like Ditmars Boulevard, and the local mom and pop shops, they are hanging by a thread. They shouldn't be the COVID police. We should be empowering these business owners. Okay,
thank you. Question number 2. Do you support rent stabilization for small business commercial tenants? And that would start with Felicia.
To some degree, yes, specifically with our historical businesses. I think that we should be supporting specifically the businesses that have been around the neighborhood for a long time. So partially, yes.
Okay. And Edwin?
Yep. This is one of my main policies to prevent gentrification so that we don't have more streets like Steinway, which looked like a ghost town even before the pandemic.
And Tiffany?
Yes, and I've been doing this work, signing onto letters, organizing with incoming city council members, current city council members, rallying and working with community groups to make sure that this becomes a reality.
Okay, thank you. Next question, and this will start with Edwin. Do you support open streets, open restaurants for our local restaurants? And do you want to see additional streets closed to traffic?
Yes, but it requires input from the community. We need to talk to the locals on the ground, on those streets, and get their input. The planning needs to be very careful. We cannot be reckless and just do it so that we can say, oh, we're a politician, we did it. No, no, no. Ask the residents.
And Tiffany?
Yes, absolutely. I love the Denmark section of the open street. You know, we should be exploring it on 31st, 30. I mean, obviously, again, always participatory, always with community input, but it's a great program.
And Felicia?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of fire hazards. There's a lot of issues navigating the streets. So I think seasonally we can talk about an open street program, but it's something I want more community input to decide.
Okay. And Tiffany, and along the same lines, do you support making curbside and sidewalk cafes permanent? Do you support removing the zoning restrictions as the city is proposing?
Yeah, I think that we need approval and planning processes to be community centered rather than like city commandeered. But we want to facilitate business in our new environment, our new realities, and curbside cafes can be part of that.
Felicia?
To sidewalks, yes. To curbside, we're going to have to phase that out. It's a safety hazard. We had a really bad accident in the Ditmars area of Astoria, and it's something that we have to take into consideration and make sure everybody's safe. But absolutely, we need to keep the sidewalk cafes, eliminate some of the processes that, to apply for those things and make them more permanent. But for the curbside, restaurants that are out on the street, we do have to phase those out and keep into consideration the current environment with COVID and outdoor dining being a necessity for small business revenue. But so I would say, again, phasing out the curbside and keeping the sidewalk.
Okay. And Edwin?
Yes, because I empathize with the business owners who were so desperate to build these little wooden shacks just so they could get an extra square footage so they could have one or two more customers because they're threading and so close to closing down. But this is an issue we need to revisit once the pandemic is over.
Okay, next question starts with Felicia. The Port Authority is studying various means of public transit now to LaGuardia Airport. Some have proposed an extension of the N line. Is this something that you would support? Eminent domain would probably have to be used, which would be confiscation of private property.
No.
And next, Edwin?
No. Not only would that cosmetically be a disaster, but it would lower the property value. The local residents would be up in arms about it. We should listen to their voices. Like I said before, we need ferry service to the airport. Elevated trains are like the outdoor wires. They're outdated, a thing of the past.
Tiffany?
I don't think so. It's just like we should avoid it because of how much it raises costs and in part because we shouldn't be removing people from their properties.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Now, next, OANA supports relieving as much pressure as possible on our infrastructure. We support requiring any new public or private developments to create their own internal sustainable power and waste disposal capabilities, such as the brown water system that was instituted in the building Durst put up down here in Hallett's Peninsula. Also, we would like to see incentives for existing structures to be converted. Do you agree? That would start with Edwin.
Yes, I do agree. And let's make sure that we actually commence with our audits of Department of Sanitation and other agencies that are involved in this.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Yeah, I agree.
And Felicia.
Yes, I agree. I think if Hurricane Ida taught us anything, it's the need for investment in our infrastructure, cleaning out our sewage, and the system's overloaded. So we have this has to be the direction forward.
Good. Okay, Tiffany, this will start with you. Do you support rent stabilization for 1, 2, and 3 family homes? Very prevalent in Astoria and a source of retirement income for many local citizens.
Yeah, I do. And we have to not view it in a vacuum, right? Because we have to do all of these other things to create the kind of infrastructure that is going to support, aging folks and our retirement communities and being able to retire and live comfortable, dignified lives. And we can do that through lots of different services and supports on that front as well.
Okay, I'm not sure if that's, let me just clarify that. What the question was asking was that rent stabilization, it's the 1 and 2, 3 family homes
Yeah.
that are often owned by older citizens, and they use that income from the rents for their retirement.
Yes. And what I'm saying is that we need affordable housing. I support rent stabilization. And I understand that you're saying that, it's retirement income, right? And what I'm saying is that we have to attack these problems from lots of different angles that we're benefiting a large swath of folks. Healthcare costs are astronomical, right? We can be supporting our, aging community by bringing those down, by creating services and infrastructure provided to our senior that lowers their cost of living, right? That they can retire with dignity, while also creating an infrastructure of, rent stabilized housing for all the folks that live here. I'm really, really all about making sure you're looking at the entire ecosystem and all of the different pathways that we could be using.
Okay, thank you. Felicia?
No, I would be against that. I think, talking with a lot of our seniors and people who live on fixed income, this is their retirement. And I think absolutely we have to fight for small business owners and some of those being small landlords that typically live in one apartment and they're renting out the other and they can't afford that, many of which also lost out on a lot of revenue during the rent moratorium, and then the state wasn't giving the funding in adequate time. So no, I would not.
Okay, and Edwin?
Yep, absolutely, yes. We should be funding both the tenants and the small landlords, especially after Hurricane Ida, for example. My building was severely flooded. Some people didn't have renter's insurance and everything was destroyed. We need to have these policies that benefit the working class, not make life more difficult for them to survive.
Okay, Felicia, do you agree that residential parking permits would be a solution for our lack of parking, which now results in lost time and increased pollution as our residents drive around looking for spots to park?
No, I don't. I think there's other alternatives to decreasing pollution. I think that it sounds great on paper, but it's going to create more, bureaucracy and red tape, and it would be interesting to see that implemented. And I just assume that people are going to get more tickets, and we have to be fighting the city, nickel and diming people here.
Edwin?
Yes, we need to avoid increasing emissions. New York City, people will fight and literally kill each other over a parking spot. We can't have that happening. And part of the way that we can also solve that is by putting the city bike docking stations on larger, wider sidewalks, particularly near schools and parks.
Thank you. And Tiffany?
No, I think we need to instead be investing in our public transportation infrastructure and creating 15-minute neighborhoods.
Okay, thank you. And the next is for Edwin. OANA has proposed that community board members be elected individually in small neighborhood districts instead of a political appointment. We did attach and gave you guys a copy of our proposal, so you did have that. Would you agree with this?
Yes, and they should be a resident of the district for at least 5 years so that we prioritize local voices and are vetting people to assure that there are no conflicts of interest and that they're putting the interests of the community over profit.
Okay, Tiffany?
I think direct election to community boards is definitely worth exploring. I'm always in favor of more democracy.
Okay, thank you. And Felicia?
Yes, I think we have to fight political corruption, and the city council person should not be appointing the community board. So yeah, I think there's ways that we can make that process better and more fair.
I will say, and this seems really important. I'm sorry, but I also want to say that if that were to happen, we have to be really intentional about creating a system that makes it accessible for folks to run.
Mm-hmm. Of course, yes. Okay. And Tiffany, do you think the COVID-19 vaccine should be mandated? Yes or no?
Yeah, if it saves lives, it's worth doing. Like we've got to do it.
Mhm. Okay, Felicia?
No, I don't. There's a lot of people who no longer have access to a job or education, and I don't agree with people losing a job based on their vaccination status.
And Edwin?
No, firing thousands of workers in the middle of a pandemic and denying them health care as a result of their loss of employment is going to cost us way more lives than it will save us. Healthcare is a human right. The Green Party believes that. The other two corporate parties don't have that as part of their major platform.
Okay, and Felicia, the last question in this section. Do you support the creation of bus lanes on 21st Street? And if so, would you either have to remove parking or one lane of traffic? Which would you support?
No, I don't support creating the bus lane. I think it's going to create a lot of headache for small businesses, particularly those that need to have a loading zone. So no, I wouldn't support it. I don't want to continue to remove the only parking spots we have left here in the neighborhood. So no.
Edwin?
I say no. I take the Q69 all the time, and I always get to my destination on time. So usually I say if it's not broken, well, then don't fix it.
And Tiffany?
Yeah, I support a bus lane on 21st. I think that I want to continue talking to my neighbors about sort of like which options make the most sense infrastructure wise.
Okay, just so you know, we have a survey, an active survey going out. Last time I looked, we had about 600 responses, and it was about 50-50 for and against at that point. So, so that is that section. Now the next thing, do you each, if you want to ask a question of another candidate, this is your chance to do so. One question of another candidate. So when we start with Tiffany.
Yeah. Felicia, who would you support for council speaker and why?
Ooh, that's a good question. I honestly haven't thought ahead in terms of council speaker. I wish we could have Joe Borelli, who's going to be the minority leader for sure. I would love to see Joe in a position like that. As far as a Democrat council speaker, I think that's something that I want to, talk to people and explore more. But I would vote Joe Borelli if he was, if that was possible.
Good. And Felicia, you have a question of either Edwin or Tiffany?
Do I only get to pick one?
Yeah, we're doing one. Yeah.
All right. I think my biggest concern really as a mom, one of us is going to win the seat. I'm a huge advocate for victims of human trafficking and domestic violence. And I guess I'll have to direct this question to Tiffany. I know that there's a lot of talk about the changes in our carceral system. And what I'm most concerned about is victims of crime. So I know you talked about, not having pretrial detention. So my biggest question for you, I guess clarification question is for individuals who commit sexual assault, do you believe in pretrial or post-trial detention? And another, I know a lot of your agenda or proposal is about parole, but what about those individuals that are domestic abusers that can't go back to their home? And, those are just some clarifying questions I have for you is what do we do with, perpetrators of violence, specifically sexual violence against women?
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So there are like 5 things there. I'm going to do my best to answer them and sort of be respectful of time. But, I will say, one, I've done a lot of work. My earliest legal career work actually was working with survivors of domestic violence and sexual violence and getting VAWAs and U visas, being able to change their status so that they could stay and be safe in our communities. The other thing is that it's not a binary. Hurt people. And so we have to start interrupting cycles of violence. None of this is like clearly black and white. And the thing that I am most proud of and really lean into is that the things that I'm talking about, they're empirically proven to work better than the system that we're using. We know, for example, that by the police's own account, in terms of sexual violence, for example, that the clearance rates are less than 40%. 40% of the time, nobody is being held accountable. And so, when you talk about what works and when you work closely with survivors and victims like I have, and also been directly impacted by domestic violence in my family, in my community, you know that the priorities cannot just be do nothing or a jail cell. You have to understand that the biggest priority above all else is making sure that you heal, making sure that you aren't hurt in the same way again, making sure that nobody else is, and understanding that the system we have in place actually doesn't account for that. But there are some models that help do that. The other thing is that we've got to myth bust a little bit, right? I spent 7 years as a public defender, had a lot of cases that involved allegations of domestic violence, and this idea that folks end up homeless. There's actually a lot of issues where understanding that it is lower income, Black and brown families that cycle through our court system to be held quote unquote responsible in these places, when we know that rates of domestic violence and sexual violence are consistent across socioeconomic status, across race, but only lower income Black and brown communities are being affected by this. And what we actually find is that in domestic disputes where the police are called, what we're finding is that the court and the prosecutor, over the objection of the victim and survivor in that case, is rendering somebody homeless when in fact the family wants and needs to stay together because they're dependent on one another, because they have a child in common, because that's the only way that they have a home and can afford it together. And so we need to be deeply investing in the kinds of holistic wraparound services that provide families that choose to stay together opportunities to heal, to break cycles, to be more healthy with one another. For me, it is all about leaning into the empirical evidence, to reducing harm as much as we possibly can. And then, yes, we'll have to hold folks accountable when they do harm.
Okay. Edwin.
Yes, I have a question for Tiffany. Your party, the Democratic Party, likes to hail itself as the party of democracy, as opposed to the GOP, for example, which engages in voter suppression. But I think both parties engage in voter suppression. We know that it was the Democrats who kicked the Green Party off the ballots in more than 20 states last year, including here in New York City. That's why I have to run as an independent Green and not just a Green, because Cuomo and the Democrats eliminated our ballot status. So that being said, I have a two-part question for you. One, would you support ranked choice voting in general elections? And two, would you support proportional representation like we had in the 30s, where every party is represented in City Hall based on how many people vote for them, not winner takes all?
Yeah, I support ranked choice voting. It's interesting about all these different options like around the country. So one of the jobs that I have done is I am a political organizer doing criminal justice reform work here locally and across the country. And so we've engaged in races at every level of government in places where they do have different types of systems. Like there are places where the seats are at large and it doesn't matter what party you are, and the top X number of vote getters, fill those seats. There are lots of different options. But I absolutely support ranked choice voting, but
in a general election,
would have to think more about some of the other options that you're talking about. I can't say that I've given it a ton of thought.
Do you support it in general elections?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. What I'd like to do now is give a couple minutes if you each would like to make a closing statement at this point. And then I think we can, what time is it now? It's 11:30. There's a lot of entries in the chat, a lot of them. I'm not sure how many are exactly questions though. So I will do my best to go through a few, but we only have a few minutes. And then at that point, any questions that we get out of the chat, we will forward to whoever they're directed to. So hopefully they can get back to us with an answer. And we will post those questions and answers on our website at OANA. Okay, so again, we started with Tiffany before, so let's start with Edwin this time on the closing statements.
Yes, absolutely. Like I said before, I'm not a career politician. I'm just somebody who grew up in the neighborhood and wants the best for my community. And so I hope that this election, you vote your conscience, because the spoiler effect is a myth. If you vote for a third-party candidate like myself, we will create waves across the nation where we can inspire third-party candidates to run and take our country back from a ruling class of oligarchs. These are ultra-wealthy individuals who are operating behind the scenes. They control our way of life. They buy out the politicians. And so they're not actually fighting for the working class, these Democrat and Republican parties. They're fighting for the special interests of Wall Street, big pharma, the fossil fuel industry, big real estate developers, big tech, and the private health insurance companies. I'm fighting for healthcare as a human right. That's why I led the New York City March for Medicare for All with Susan Sarandon, because it's actually part of our platform. And again, I know that my opponents care about the environment. That's true. But the party leaders will squash their efforts because the party leaders are who set the direction of the party. And you, like I said before, you can't change the Democrat or Republican parties. They change you. And that's a fact. And we know that the source of suffering is this two-party system. And if we don't act now, this city will never look the same again. Astoria will never be the same again. We have to actually stand up and fight for our freedoms because they're being stripped away day by day. It's the ruling class who's misinforming us through the mainstream media. They're the ones who want us to hate each other so that we're not being angry at them. We're too distracted fighting our neighbors while they divide and conquer us, while they take all the money for themselves, for their criminal friends. We need to take the power back to ordinary people. This is what a grassroots movement looks like. It's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be televised. It's going to be people like you and me who go to the polls and vote for somebody like Edwin Dejesus, the only true independent candidate who grew up in Astoria, Queens, who's not a Democrat, not a Republican, a New Yorker.
Okay, and next would be Tiffany.
Yeah, I just want to thank y'all for the opportunity to have a conversation. I'm going to end the way that I started. I love this community, and I just want to do the work to help build the safest, healthiest communities we can possibly have. And it's a continuation of the work that I've been doing. When I talked about those multiple crises that we're facing, we're hitting the ground running on those things. We are fighting for our small businesses and working families. We're out there talking to our neighbors, knocking doors, engaging them in flood relief, working with every level of government already, from the governor to our state legislature, working with our small businesses to connect folks with services. We've organized with directly impacted folks and elected officials to help decarcerate and create safer conditions on Rikers Island, while working with violence interruption groups to address the root causes of violence in our neighborhoods, right? Being on the front lines, organizing with folks against the proposed polluting energy power plant, and working with our electeds on Green New Deal infrastructure. This is my home. I want to build safe and healthy communities. And I know that I can't do it alone, right? Like, it serves no purpose and has no appeal to me to go in and be a lonely vote, or a lonely voice, or somebody that is just, agitating and disrupting. I want to execute on an agenda. And that means the ability to coalition build. So I'm also really proud that I have built the largest, broadest, most diverse coalition of support to come with me into City Hall, from our local elected leaders to labor organizations to community groups, and understanding that it's going to take an entire community to get this work done. So I'm just really, really looking forward to doing it with y'all.
Thank you, Tiffany. And Felicia.
I just want to say to my neighbors, the stakes have never been higher for our neighborhoods. We need someone who's going to prioritize public safety and getting trash off our streets, and I'll fight hard for you. I know what it's like to carry a stroller up subway stairs. I know what it's like to have to juggle work and, becoming an educator for my kids during the pandemic. I know your struggles, and I want to fight for you at City Hall. 51% of our budget goes to the education system, and we need a parent at the table fighting for us. I'm here to fight for everyone, not just parents, because right now, as I said earlier, we're in need of leadership. We're in need of leaders who will fight for the real needs of the community. Part of the beauty of running as a Republican in a majority Democrat area is I get to fight for the true needs of the community. I get to build based on what the needs that you have. are. And so I'm excited to day one get to work fighting for you. And we've already been fighting together. And it's been a beautiful journey. Thank you to every single person who's been on this journey of supporting my candidacy for city council. And, I'm a mom of two. I want to create more pathways and opportunities for our children and for all people of all backgrounds. I believe that quality education and economic opportunities, while supporting our families, that is the only way forward. This is how we prevent crime. But at the same time, we have to invest in public safety and make sure that we support law-abiding citizens and victims of crime. And together we'll do that. We'll restore a city that we can truly be proud of. We will fight together. And I look forward to being your first ever elected city councilwoman. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It looks like Tiffany has to leave us. She has an obligation that she has to get to, but we really appreciate it. And I think that what we're going to do,
Richard, I do want to encourage people, please send along any additional questions you have. And then also, as always, please check out the, really, because I'm a huge nerd, the really detailed plans we have on our website, but keep them coming. And I really, really appreciate the space that y'all created this evening.
well, what I'm going to do is we're going to go through the chat, and what questions we see there, we'll forward to whoever they're directed to. And we hope to get responses, like I said before, and we'll be able to post those responses on our website. We'll let people know. So again, I want to thank everybody for being with us, and I did a great job. And to everyone, go out and vote. It's starting the 23rd is early voting. Vote. And also, if you have any further questions on the ballot initiatives, feel free to contact us if you need further explanations on those. We'd like to again thank Felicia, Edwin, and Tiffany for joining us. We'd also like to give a special shout out to Victor Prado, who is our host tonight. And again, you guys have a wonderful time. I hope to see you Sunday at our scuba diving in Hallett's Cove. And then next Tuesday at Variety Boys and Girls Club on Weatherization, and November 9th with our town hall with Congresswoman Maloney. So with that, everyone, thank you so much, and we'll talk soon.
Take care.
God bless everyone.
Okay,
Thank
bye.
you.
Okay.